Russia is desperate. So desperate that it's resorting to drastic measures, like pulling 50-year-old Soviet-era tanks out of the scrapyard to use in its ongoing invasion of Ukraine. It's an embarrassing move from a country that claims to be one of the mightiest military forces in the world, and it's perhaps the clearest confirmation we've seen so far that Russia is rapidly running out of military hardware. The news was broken by an open-source intelligence OSINT researcher who goes by the name Junkyard on X. Junkyard has been tracking Russian tank storage depots throughout the war so far, keeping an eye on any interesting movements or activities at several major facilities across the nation. He's posted various interesting updates in the past, sharing his findings with followers and keen observers worldwide. Late last year, for example, he posted a fascinating thread in which he revealed that Russia's 1,295th Central Tank Reserve Base, which had once held more than 1,000 vehicles, including BMP infantry fighting vehicles and Soviet-era T-55 and T-62 tanks, had been almost completely emptied. It was the first time we'd seen anything like this occur, and it came at a time when reports and rumours were beginning to swirl that Russian tank supplies were starting to dwindle. Junkyard's latest update provides even more proof to back up those claims. On July 14, Junkyard posted aerial images of Russian tank storage bases, including the 349th, where old Soviet T-72 tanks are stored. According to his analysis, it appears that Russian forces have begun the process of bringing those tanks, most of which date back to the late 1970s, out of storage and back into action. Junkyard explained, "Based on recent signs at major tank storage bases like the 349th that hold T-72As, it appears Russia is prepping them to bring them back to service." The online OSINT researcher went on to say that it's likely Russia is currently working to determine which tanks, if any, are actually combat ready or suitable for repair and refurbishment, given the fact that they're so old and often in a state of disrepair. So even at a time when Russia is spending record amounts on its military and going to great lengths to expand its army, while also bombarding Ukraine daily with drones, missiles and artillery fire, behind the scenes, its soldiers are having to scamper through scrapyards and long-forgotten storage facilities in search of mothballed tanks that might still be able to run. Here's a look at how the country reached this humiliating new low. Russia has long been famed for its tanks. It's always maintained a large supply of combat-ready tanks while keeping thousands more older units in storage, ready and waiting to be refurbished, modernized and deployed if needed. This is something the country and its leader, President Vladimir Putin, prides itself on. And when the invasion of Ukraine began, estimates varied, but according to some sources, Russia was believed to have in excess of 16,000 tanks in total, with around 3,300 of them being fully operational. That included the likes of T-90s, T-80s, T-14 Armatas, T-72s, T-62s and T-64s. However, it didn't take long at all for Ukraine's armed forces to start damaging and destroying Russian tanks as they crossed over the border and onto Ukrainian soil. Ukraine has used numerous methods throughout the conflict so far to counteract the Kremlin's tank army, including drones, anti-tank guided missiles, and even mines. Western-supplied weapons have helped with this. Ukraine has been able to rely on hundreds of American FGM-148 Javelin missiles, for example, along with thousands of NLAW anti-tank weapons from the United Kingdom, which are capable of destroying tanks with a single shot at short range. Ukraine has also gradually mastered the art of drone warfare as the war has progressed, and it's not uncommon nowadays to hear reports or even see video footage of Ukrainian drone swarms honing in on enemy tanks, skillfully striking their weakest points and smashing them to smithereens in an instant. It's also fair to say that Russia has not exactly used its tanks very efficiently or intelligently during the war so far. Tanks work best when they're part of combined arms forces. They need infantry units nearby to protect them against close-range threats like the aforementioned anti-tank missiles, for example. However, early on in the war, Russian tanks were often seen fighting alone, making them easy targets for Ukrainian anti-tank teams in the area. Reports have also revealed that many Russian tank crews lack training and experience, resulting in poor decision-making on the battlefield. Plus, there's the fact that Russian tanks are best suited for open field combat and don't work quite as well in dense urban environments like the towns and cities of Ukraine. Thanks to their home ground advantage, Ukraine's defenders have found ways to ambush and eliminate tank after tank. There's no way of knowing exactly how many they've taken out in total, and estimates vary wildly. Earlier this year, for example, Ukraine claimed to have destroyed its 10,000th Russian tank. The open-source intelligence site, Oryx, reports a much smaller but still significant tally of around 3,700 to 4,000 tanks. The true figure might be somewhere in between. Either way, Ukraine has destroyed thousands of Russian tanks, and Russia has had to cope with those losses. It's done so in two distinct ways. Firstly, Russia has attempted to ramp up its tank production. Its goal is to produce tanks faster than Ukraine can destroy them, replenishing and expanding its tank army in hopes of eventually overwhelming the Ukrainian resistance and capturing not just contested regions like Donetsk and Luhansk, but major cities like Kharkiv and Kyiv. General Christopher Cavoli, the former Supreme Allied Commander Europe for NATO, confirmed this earlier in the year, writing, "Russian ground forces in Ukraine have lost an estimated 3,000 tanks, 9,000 armored vehicles, 13,000 artillery systems, and over 400 air defense systems in the past year. As a result, the Russian Defense Industrial Base is expected to roll out 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 Iskander ballistic and cruise missiles this year. Comparatively, the United States only produces about 135 tanks per year and no longer produces new Bradley fighting vehicles. Additionally, we anticipate Russia to produce 250,000 artillery shells per month, which puts it on track to build a stockpile 3 times greater than the United States and Europe combined." The statistics confirm Cavoli's claims. A recent report in Military Watch magazine found that Russia has tripled production rates of its T-90M main battle tanks, going from around 90 to 110 new tanks in 2020 to almost 300 in 2024. At the same time, new tanks cost massive amounts of money to make. Each new T-90M cost up to around $4.5 million, and with Russia's economy struggling and President Putin forced to cut the country's defense budget for 2026, it won't be able to keep on churning out tanks indefinitely. The second way in which Russia has tried to balance out its tank losses is to bring old tanks out of storage facilities. As stated earlier, it has kept many tanks from the days of the Soviet Union and the Cold War in long-term storage, just in case they were ever needed. One problem with this method is that many tanks in question are so old that they're simply not suitable for modern-day combat conditions. As such, they usually have to be thoroughly repaired and refurbished before they can roll out and be of any use on the battlefield, and that takes time, money, manpower, and resources. Another problem is that even though Russia originally had a very large stock of mothballed Soviet tanks, it's rapidly used up a lot of the stronger and more modern ones, leaving only the older, weaker units, which brings us back to those ancient T-72s spotted by Jompy and other OSINT researchers. Estimates suggest that Russia had a little over 1,100 T-72 tanks stored away in its various facilities, including T-72As from the late 70s and Ural models which are even older. According to Jompy's analysis, pretty much all of those tanks are classed as being in either poor or very poor condition. But with such limited inventory of quality equipment left to choose from, Russia is being forced to bring those low-grade tanks out of retirement. As Jompy notes, a recent satellite image of the 111th storage base shows that around half of the remaining well-preserved equipment has gone. Only half the base is visible, but the one that stored the remaining well-preserved equipment, almost everything is gone. It's a similarly grim story for Russia at other bases. At the 1295th, for instance, Jompy says, "A bunch of very rough-looking BMPs, and that's it. Even the huge scrapyard is getting emptied. Probably the local officer in charge is profiting from selling scrap metal to local dealers." Because of this, it'll be shocking but not surprising if we soon see Russian troops driving T-72As and Ural tanks over the border and into Ukraine. To understand just how embarrassing this move is from the Russians, we have to take a closer look at the tanks in question. The T-72A is one of the oldest versions of the Soviet T-72 main battle tank. It's a second-generation tank dating back several decades. Many leading military forces now use third or even fourth-generation tanks. Ukraine, for example, has received various third-generation tanks from allies across the Western world, like Challenger 2 tanks from the United Kingdom, Leopard 2s from Germany, and M1A1 Abrams from the US. South Korea, meanwhile, has the highly advanced K2 Black Panther 4th generation, which is widely regarded as one of the most sophisticated models on the planet today. Some second-generation tanks may still be viable in certain situations, but the fact of the matter is that the world has moved on, and today's tank technology far exceeds that of decades gone by. And when we take a closer look at the T-72A's technical specifications, it's easy to see that it's outdated. For example, the T-72A is powered by a 780 horsepower diesel engine. This helps it reach peak speeds of around 37 miles per hour on roads. It's capable of tackling relatively tough terrain too, but most modern tanks have much stronger engines under the hood. The M1 Abrams, for example, boasts a 1,500 horsepower engine, which provides the kind of power-to-weight ratio that the T-72A can only dream of. Thanks to that, more modern tanks like the M1 can move much faster across different types of ground. And speaking of movement, one of the T-72A's major weaknesses can be seen when the operator throws it in reverse. When moving backwards, it travels at a snail's pace, far lower than its usual speed. This puts it at a serious tactical disadvantage. In contrast, today's top tanks, like the M1 Abrams, have multiple reverse gears, which allow them to reach higher speeds while reversing, and can generally travel at the same speeds while reversing as they would moving forward. This makes them significantly more mobile. Modern tanks have also more advanced transmission and suspension systems than older, outdated models like the T-72A. They handle far better on rough or rocky ground, with a smoother, more comfortable ride for those on board. In contrast, riding a 72A is a notoriously unpleasant experience. The interior is far from ergonomic. Even with a 3-man crew, it feels cramped and claustrophobic, with those inside forced to contort their bodies into uncomfortable positions for hours on end. This might not seem all that important in the grand scheme of things, and tanks aren't exactly made to be cozy and comfy. However, forcing tank crews into such tight, confined conditions for long periods can easily induce fatigue, making them more likely to make poor decisions on the battlefield, put themselves and their fellow troops into danger, and give the enemy an advantage. That's one of the key reasons why crew comfort is quite a large concern in modern tank designs. Many of the leading models in use today have relatively spacious crew compartments, advanced NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical protection systems to keep crew members safe, and other features like smart climate controls. As far as firepower goes, once again the T-72A is found wanting. It's equipped with a 125mm 2A46 smoothbore gun, which is capable of firing a range of munitions. It's not a bad gun, but it lacks the advanced fire control systems and state-of-the-art optics found in more modern tanks. Today's tanks tend to feature 120mm smoothbore guns instead, which are able to fire a vast array of advanced kinetic and chemical energy rounds. They boast advanced fire control systems, thermal imagers, hunter-killer capabilities that allow the tank commander to search for and identify new targets while the gunner fires on others, and digital ballistics computers to precisely and officially calculate the trajectory of their shots and hit their targets with remarkable precision. In other words, today's tanks are far better at finding, locking on, and striking their targets quickly and to devastating effect, while the T-72A, yet again, is a much more sluggish and unreliable option. In terms of defensive capabilities too, the T-72A has no hope of keeping up with today's top tanks. It has some composite armor here and there to guard against various types of fire, but lacks the strong, reinforced and often modular armor packages of modern alternatives. Many modern tanks come with explosive reactive armor, ERA, which offers powerful protection even against anti-tank missiles. It works by actually detonating a controlled explosive charge if and when a projectile strikes it. The resulting explosive force essentially helps to disrupt the incoming projectile, reducing its penetrative power. On top of that, leading 3rd and 4th generation tanks also have active protection systems, APS. These systems again help to prevent certain anti-tank weapons from damaging or destroying the vehicle itself. There are soft kill APS options like laser dazzlers and smoke grenades, which help to hide the tank from enemy lines of sight, as well as hard kill APS measures, which typically involve the controlled use of explosives to target and destroy incoming missiles or shells before the point of impact. The T-72A has none of this. Its survivability is exceptionally low compared to modern tanks, and it has a critical design flaw that can turn it into a veritable death trap for any unfortunate souls stuck inside. This design flaw is related to the tank's auto-loading gun. Experts have historically been divided over whether or not it's better to have an auto-loader in a tank. On the one hand, the autoloader can make the tank more efficient. It takes over the work of one member of the tank crew, allowing the tank to operate with 3 people instead of 4. Today's top autoloaders are also lightning fast, allowing tanks like the K2 Black Panther to fire at faster rates than most other models. On the other hand, when autoloaders are badly designed or poorly implemented, they can cause more problems than they solve. They make the tank more mechanically complex, for example, introducing a whole other system that could be damaged or might fail in the heat of battle. Additionally, in the T-72A in particular, the autoloader requires easy access to the tank's ammunition storage, so it can rapidly load up and fire on demand. Because of this, the ammo is all stored in a carousel-style system just below the tank's turret. And that's a problem, because it effectively turns the tank into a powder keg. All it takes is one clean strike to the turret, and the whole thing goes up in flames. That might not have been such a big issue back in 1979, when the T-72A first started to roll out. Nowadays, however, many of the top anti-tank measures being used in Ukraine, like those aforementioned Javelin missiles or Ukrainian kamikaze drones, specifically target the top and turret sections of tanks, where the armor tends to be at its weakest point. In other words, it's remarkably easy, with the right equipment, for a single Ukrainian soldier to bring down an entire T-72A and wipe out its crew in the blink of an eye, with nothing but a single missile or a relatively cheap drone. Of course, the Russians aren't blind to this problem. They know that their T-72's design is inherently flawed, which is why the military has attempted some rather innovative solutions to improve it. They've tried constructing coop cages around the tank's turret for extra protection against drones, and some T-72s have even been spotted sporting additional turtle shell style armor welded onto their top sections and around the turrets, providing an additional layer of protection. While creative, these methods aren't exactly effective. The extra armor makes the T-72 heavier, slower, and harder to maneuver, particularly in urban environments or areas of dense foliage. In other words, even when the Russians try to make their tanks stronger, they also simultaneously weaken them. At the time of its release, the T-72A wasn't a bad tank in the slightest. In fact, it represented a major upgrade over the original Ural model of the T-72. It introduced a laser rangefinder, an electronic fire control system, smoke grenade launchers, and stronger composite armor on the top. But tank technology evolves quite quickly, and as we've seen, the T-72A has no place on the battlefields of 2025. It's slow, unreliable, and weak, with primitive technology, inferior firepower by today's standards, and no hope of defeating a more advanced 3rd or 4th generation tank in a straight fight. Despite that, the situation is now so bad for Russia that it's having to turn to these tired old tanks in a desperate attempt to keep up the pressure on Ukraine. Many of them will likely be too old and damaged to be of any use, and most of those that are redeployed are likely to be blown up before they can deal any significant damage, giving Putin even greater losses to contend with. In short, it's a grim time for Russia, and you can learn about more bad news for the Kremlin in our recent videos, looking at how a major ally has turned its back on Putin, or how NATO has threatened to bomb the Russian region of Kaliningrad if Russia downs another commercial jet. And be sure to subscribe to our trusted news channel too, so you can stay in the know on all things related to the Russia-Ukraine war.